In the theology of the Western churches, the notion of original sin is seen to come into prominence in the work of Augustine of Hippo and in his writings in the early 5th century. Augustine is prepared to link original sin very closely to the stories found in the early chapters of the book of Genesis. And it's one of the themes of Augustine's life is that he keeps returning to comment on those early chapters of Genesis. One of the interesting things is that we no longer read those chapters in the same way because we live in a world where we think of human life as being involved in evolution. We are the products of evolution. So that leaves us with a question. How does the long tradition of talking about original sin fit into a world where we talk about evolution? Now, Megan, I know you've worked on this, so
Yes.
Can you talk us through this link between evolution and original sin?
Yes, definitely. So I think it's clear from studying evolution that it definitely raises problems for sort of literal interpretation of the Genesis story, where there was a garden and a snake and this mistake that was made. And so definitely evolution urges us to have a different approach to interpreting, I think, these scriptural passages. But there have been some developments in evolutionary theory that I think actually lend some support to some of the things that theologians have been trying to say about inherited sin. And so a couple developments that have happened in something called the extended evolutionary synthesis so there's something called epigenetics, which I think gives us, in certain ways, a language to think about inherited sin. And so epigenetics is this idea that we inherit from our ancestors not just a genome, but also an epigenome. And the epigenome is sort of molecular switches or cues for how the genome should be expressed. And the epigenome can be influenced by environmental factors. And so the idea that's coming through with epigenetics is that our epigenome gets impacted by our environment and also by choices that we make, so smoking or not smoking and dietary choices and exercise. But then those changes can be passed on to future generations. And so I think from the perspective of theology, this is a really interesting way of thinking about the inheritance of sin, just this idea that the choices that the people have made who came before us have kind of lasting effects that could be detrimental to the future generations. So I think there's certain developments in evolution that are happening lately that actually lend some support to this idea that sin is something that we are sort of born already affected by.
And of course, there's another aspect of this, isn't it? Is that if you're thinking in the time of Augustine, you can think of original sin as an event that happened then, and then it passes on its effects down through generations. But of course, if we're actually thinking in terms of evolution, we can think of original sin as just part of the existential condition of human beings. We're living in a universe where not everything is hunky dory. Where this is not the best of all. We shouldn't start thinking this is the best of all possible worlds, and also that original sin reminds us that in the flux of which we are the present moment, we are original sin is the shorthand that explains our limitations.
I think that's right. Our limitations, and then also the persistence, which really baffles us sometimes, of the suffering and evil that's in the world. I think original sin is one way of trying to talk about that, and that if we didn't have this concept of original sin, I think we would lose a great deal in explaining sort of the human situation now.
And of course, there is this other aspect, and that is that original sin is itself a mystery.
Yes.
And so it's reminding us that in trying to deal with the complexity of not only our humanity, but our suffering and the wickedness we find ourselves both contributing to and receiving from, that we are actually dealing with something that is really beyond, it is itself mysterious.
I think that's right. Yeah, we can never quite put our finger on what it is or even how it started exactly, where it came from. But I think we all recognize on a sort of personal existential level that we experience these types of things. And so I think Original Sin gives us a really important language for talking about that.
Thanks, Megan, for exploring these two seemingly very different but quite interrelated realities.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Mhm.